Welcome to the Comstock channel. My name is Brianne Hendrickson. Today I have Matthew Cruz with us to talk about the 2023 and 2024 Brazil outlook. Welcome.
Hi, Brianne.
How are you?
Doing good.
So where are you at currently?
I'm in Brazil. I'm in the state called Minas Gerais. It's considered the southeast part of Brazil. It's maybe not as famous as Mato Grosso in some of those places. I kind of joke that it's maybe like the Ohio in or Indiana in the Corn Belt. It's they do produce some good crops here, but it's not as big of a production state as some of the others.
All right, so I'm going to let you go ahead and take the reins on this. You're going to do pretty much a presentation about Brazil and their outlook. So I'll let you go from here.
And talk about the corn prospects in Brazil. Last year they had a record season at about 132 million metric tons, and that was on 55 million acres. This next season, CONAB and USDA already looked out and said, hey, with this El Nino and being drier in Mato Grosso, we don't think they're going to get a bigger crop. And so they already were expecting a pullback in production from last year, which doesn't happen very often. I think the last time they had a reduction was in 2017, where the crop actually got smaller from the previous year. And so about 6 years ago. And so they are also, just because the going into the planting season, the domestic prices were horrible. Corn prices were, I think, even at $3 or less in parts of Mato Grosso, the cash prices. And so they were actually expecting a reduction in acres. Now, what's happened now as we've gotten into the planting season and we're seeing that the soybean planting is delayed, that corn prices have shot back up, at least temporarily. So we'll see how that works out. But the corn exports for 2023 were hit records. They're probably going to be around that 55 to 56 million metric tons. And so for the first time ever, they are going to be the largest corn exporting country for Brazil. And but there's a lot of talk now, speculation about the replanting that's going to take place in Mato Grosso. And I've talked to some of my friends that farm in Mato Grosso, and one in particular said he already knows he's going to cut his safrinha corn production by 50%, his corn acres. And I'm hearing a lot of that discussion. Now, it's maybe not everywhere. There was a farm organization this week that came out and said that they're estimating that corn acres in Mato Grosso were going to be down 25%. Now, they are the largest corn production state. And so just that amounts to about 4.3 million acres. So it is significant. It's not a small area. A 4 million acre reduction in the United States would be quite a bit. And so that's not confirmed, but we're still speculating on what that is. But that's probably the best guesstimate that we've seen at this point early in this stage. And we won't, the planting for the second crop really won't hit its stride until February. And so we probably won't know more until then. This is what for the largest global corn production countries, this is what things have done for them. You can kind of see where the United States is versus Brazil. So, Brazil is still a distant third place. It's just the fact that they're exporting so much more of their production. They're exporting 40% of their total amount versus the U.S., we're exporting roughly 15 to 16% of our production. I've talked about before, there are 3 distinct crops in Brazil. It's corn crops. And you can kind of see what they've done. We're going back to, 2004, that first crop of corn made up the majority of it. And you look out over time, that first crop of corn has pretty much stayed the same size, maybe even gotten a little bit smaller over time. It really hasn't changed. What's changed in Brazil is this second crop of corn. Where in the blue here, you can kind of see how it's just gotten larger and larger over time. And this is kind of what's being projected for this year. Now, there is a third crop of corn in this orange. It's pretty insignificant, but it is something that the market is kind of distinguished from the other crops just because of a different planting window. But you can kind of see here, the first crop corn can go up or down by 3 million metric tons. It's not nothing, but it's not gonna change the global ending stocks all that much. It really comes down to the second crop of corn, and that doesn't get started here until next month. Once again, like the soybeans, but even more so, Mato Grosso is the big dog when it comes to corn production. So I think you got to add up the next 4 states together to match the corn production in Mato Grosso, and so they make a pretty big difference there, and that's why so much of the attention falls to Mato Grosso and what's going on there. If you get a 5% change in the state that I'm at, where we're producing 7 million metric tons, it doesn't make near as much difference as it does in Mato Grosso. Similar to the soybeans, this kind of shows you where that first crop corn is produced and the second crop corn is produced. You can kind of see that a lot more of that first crop corn is in the south, southeast, and this northeast region. This is where I farmed in Bahia. You can see a pretty large concentration of corn there. This is roughly, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, where I am right now. And so Minas Gerais has been the largest producer of first crop corn, but you can see here how all that concentrates goes into the center west region, especially the Mato Grosso, starting in January. And so you there's the first crop, there's the second crop, there's the first crop, there's the second crop. So you can kind of see how that has shifted over time. This shows you what's happened with the corn exports in Brazil, and that's obviously had a major impact. They've become a major competitor of that in the United States. This is what they're, this 55, 56 million metric tons is where they're projected to end up for this season, and that would put them in the first place for largest corn producer. Now, with some of these challenges that they're having and a cut in acres next year, I think it's possible that their exports will drop. Maybe if our surge, maybe the United States can come back into that number 1 spot. But the trend is pretty clear. This is, look at what they've done. They've quintupled their corn exports in 13 years. And so what's going to happen in the next 13 years after that? This shows you what prices currently are for exports. And so, right now the U.S. is sitting in a pretty good spot where here in the red, our corn prices are a lot more competitive. This $214 per ton versus $234 in Brazil. Obviously, that goes back and forth, but I think with the short crop in Brazil, or the pending short crop or projected short crop, that's probably not going to change all too soon. Something that has changed in Brazil, which is, I think, notable, is like 20, 25 years ago in the United States, where we had major growth in the corn ethanol industry. You're starting to see that happen now in Brazil, where they, rather to avoid a lot of the transportation costs, they're trying to consume it and process it there in the state where it's produced, and which makes a lot of sense for them, right? That's what's happened in the Midwest. And so you can kind of see what's happening here, where in a short amount of time, how quickly those corn ethanol production is increasing, and is projected to continue to increase. It's still, we're producing 15 billion gallons and they're producing 1.6 billion gallons. Okay, it's a lot smaller than the United States, but it is an industry with a lot of room and potential for growth. And that should be somewhat concerning to U.S. Ethanol industry, because we also depend on exports for our ethanol. And the more we can export, the more ethanol companies can buy and purchase from us and process and consume, right? And so you kind of see that prior to 2017, Brazil wasn't exporting much ethanol, and now it's really starting to grow. It's kind of stagnated here the last 3 years. With I think a lot of that's due to the COVID, but they are a formidable competitor, and there's reason to believe that if they expand more ethanol production, they're going to want to expand their exports as well. A lot of that is due to these guys here. This is FS Bioenergia. This is the first pure corn ethanol plant in Brazil, at least on a large scale, and they're producing for energy needs. they're using renewable eucalyptus wood chips to fuel their plant. And what that does is it gives them a much lower carbon rating score, and it allows them to sell their ethanol to other buyers like California or places in Europe that are looking for a more, I suppose, lower carbon footprint score compared to what a typical plant would have in the United States. And this is a debate that there is ongoing in the United States. It's something that we've talked a lot about Comstock with regards to the carbon pipeline. And so I guess I'm just making people aware that this plant can sell to certain ethanol markets around the world that the ethanol plant in my backyard in Hartley, Iowa cannot because it has a too high of a carbon score. And the carbon pipeline would change that. And so in some ways, oddly enough, the corn ethanol being produced in Brazil is more competitive because of that. So historically, much of the ethanol in Brazil has been produced from sugarcane, and they kind of shun the corn ethanol, but I think that mindset is changing here. Now, there's still a very strong sugarcane industry. One of the main disadvantages of sugarcane is that it has to be it has to be processed within 3 days of being harvested. Whereas the corn obviously can be stored for months or even a year or more if they wanted. And so that's why so much of the land around the sugar mills are expensive, because they have to source it from nearby because it has to be processed right away. I just thought I'd show you what the exchange rate has done. This is something that U.S. farmers don't have to think about, right? And so that's a big advantage to them. But the Brazilian farmers have a risk of currency because a lot of their fertilizer is still imported. A lot of their inputs are imported. Soybean industry is all dollarized. And so they, have that risk. And so you kind of see here how their currency really devalued here going into COVID. And it really hasn't come back all that much since then. It's kind of been in a sideways trading range from, 490 to 550 for the most part in the last few years. And so, not much has changed since then, but this always has a big impact on Brazilian farmers, because if they they're buying in dollars, they want to sell in dollars, otherwise they have that risk to the currency. This shows you the general path of where the production moves out from Mato Grosso. You can kind of see that historically it's all moved out to Santos, and that's kind of changing now, where more and more is heading out through the Amazon basin, where I think as much as a third of the production in Mato Grosso now runs out through Santarém and Barcarena and different places like that here in Roraima. And so that's cheapened up their logistics a little bit. And so they're not quite as heavily reliant on Santos and these ports like they used to be just 10 years ago. Those northern ports have becoming more vital, and what we've seen, similar to our Mississippi River, where our exports are somewhat reliant on the river levels of the Mississippi. Now they're becoming more reliant on the Amazon River levels as well. And the river levels on the Amazon in the dry and rainy season would go up and down quite a bit. And that didn't matter because they weren't using it to ship as much grain. And now they are quite a bit. You can kind of see here that, almost half of those exports are going out of those northern ports in that Amazon basin. And so it starts to make quite a big difference from just a relatively short time ago. I'm wrapping up here, but just want to break down for everyone, what the ecosystem is in a lot of these growth production areas. Most of the growth has happened in the Cerrado basin. That's in this kind of purplish blue here. A lot of the growth is kind of entering in this Mato Grosso here as well. And so you can kind of see here that there's not much production in this Amazon basin. That's where this is, the Amazon basin right here. And most of it is in this region. So you hear that all the growth is coming down from chopping down rainforest. and I'm not saying that's not happening. There is some of it, unfortunately. It's not zero like we'd like it to be, but much of it's not. It's not to that extreme that the media makes it out. So a lot of it is all happening here. So this is where our farm is located, right here in this Minas Gerais region. This is what the deforestation rate has done. It didn't do too well under the Bolsonaro administration. Lula, in his first 2 terms, actually brought it down quite a bit, and this is in thousands of square kilometers. And then as Bolsonaro came into power, he was much more willing to develop some of that Amazon region. You kind of see what it started to uptick. And now Lula is back again for a 3rd term as president. So in Brazil, you get 2 terms as president. Someone else can come in for a term, and then you have a right to come back and run again. And so that's what's happened, where Lula has now come in after Bolsonaro, and they've already projected that the deforestation rates are going to start dropping again based off some of his policies. And so say what you want about Lula, but that's why a lot of the environmentalists, I think, like him, a lot of the NGOs, just because of his record on the deforestation rate, have actually been quite good at reducing that. So I think I mentioned earlier, so we have our next Brazil farmland tour. We're going to take a crop tour in Mato Grosso in late January. And we do a couple other things as well. We go to our farm in Minas, but so we're excited to see what the crop looks like and get some firsthand accounts of what goes on there. And we'll be providing some more information on that. Kind of wrapping up here in my last slide. Positive factors for Brazil is that they continue to expand. Exports are expanding. China is very important to them. Biodiesel looks like it's going to continue to increase. The currency is stable. Inflation has been coming down, which is important as well. The negative factors is those corn prices have been unattractive, which has forced them to kind of cut production acres. The dry weather, I think, has been hurting yield a little bit more than the market is willing to admit. Farmer sales are way behind schedule, as are projected or forecasted fertilizer investments as well. And so that's kind of something that we've looked at, that if their farmers aren't buying as much fertilizers because they're not going to plant as much, or they're not going to invest in as much as they should have or have in the past, which also means that yields might not perform as well. And so that's essentially where we're at.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Want more premium content? Subscribe to the Comstock Report, where you will receive 2 reports daily. Want more video content? We are on Facebook, YouTube, and now TikTok. So don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.